How safe is the Appalachian Trail? Really? In the last video, we have heard the story of unfortunate Joe Paulson and his too early demise. In this video, we'll dive deeper into the Appalachian Trail's dark secrets. Appalachian Trail is a place where millions of people go to spend their free time, and it is a very popular destination for spending time in the nature and recharging your batteries. However, there is a dark shadow leaning over this trail, as some horrific or mysterious events happened precisely there. The Appalachian Trail, or AT for short, is an iconic hiking trail in the eastern United States that is said to be the longest in the world. It is 2,200 miles or 3,500 kilometers long, and it extends from Springer Mountain in Georgia to Mount Katahdin in Maine. It passes through 14 states in total. The idea of the Appalachian Trail came about in 1921, and it was completed in 1937. The number of through hikes per year is around 8 to 900 per year. Until 1980s, there were relatively few through hikes per year on the Appalachian Trail. But after Bill Bryson's book, A Walk in the Woods, was published in 1998, the number of hikers rose dramatically. The book chronicles Bryson's attempt to through hike the Appalachian Trail during the spring and summer of 1996. A day spent in the nature can be a relaxing and refreshing one, but it is no secret that the wild comes with its fair share of dangers. From unpredictable weather to animal encounters, dehydration, and infections, there's a number of threats hikers should always keep at least one eye out for. But there are some dangers that stretch beyond Mother Nature. What about human nature? In this video, we will delve into such dark encounters on the Appalachian Trail. The Appalachian Trail is usually known as a quiet, serene, and blissful place where ordinary people can go to escape the fast everyday life of urban society filled with never-ending errands. Many different people from all walks of life come to the trail and occasionally interact with each other. As with any group of people in the world, undesirable elements of society eventually make their way to the trail, and sometimes that results in terrible acts being committed. Although murder does not often occur on the trail, there are several notable such incidents in the past. And although Appalachian Trail has its mystery, incidents of murder on the trail are actually extremely rare. The trail sees an annual average of several million visitors, which makes the murder rate on the trail substantially lower than in the regular society. Nevertheless, hiking with a partner is always recommended for safety purposes. Millions have hiked part of the trail, and many thousands have done the whole route from one end to another. But there have been few unfortunate ones who have succumbed to foul play at the hands of deranged killers. There have been more deaths on the trail, but many of them are a consequence of heart attacks, drowning in the river, falls, etc. Since 1974, there have been 10 murders near or on the Appalachian Trail and 2 attempted murders, some even involving serial killers. In this and the following videos, we will remember the stories of the Appalachian Trail hikers who started their dream to walk either some or all of it, and never made it back. There are different motives for murders on this trail. Some have been robbery, hate crime, some due to mental illness, and most are with motive unsolved, inexplicable. In this video, we will reveal another interesting, though heartbreaking story from the Appalachian Trail. Many parts of the story are really shocking and disturbing, especially the end. So I would suggest sticking to the end because true life and true events are sometimes quite unbelievable. Laura Susan Ramsey, or how she was affectionately called, Susu, was the third child born to Bud and Ginny Ramsey in Albion, Michigan. She was so many things: an excellent musician, vocalist, a talented thespian, a good athlete, a hilarious comedian, a great student, a loving daughter, sister, and friend to anyone she met. She was a giver of her time, her love, her talent, her help. As a young girl, she had become an excellent swimmer, swimming competitively at the local YMCA. Another glimpse at her athleticism. All sixth graders had to complete a 600-yard run in order to meet their physical education requirements. And she surprised everyone by finishing first in her class, beating all the boys as well. She would become adept at water skiing and both roller and ice skating. She also had a special musical talent, participating in high school choir, played guitar, and she also appeared in several drama club productions and was engaged with school newspaper. Another highlight of her senior year was being elected homecoming queen. However, she wasn't your stereotypical homecoming queen either. She wasn't the cheerleader in bobby socks who went steady with the captain of the football team. No prejudice. She was elected queen because everyone simply just loved her so much. It was a wonderful moment in her life because she gave so freely of herself to others, never expecting anything in return. Susan also loved to have fun and was quite the prankster, pulling gags on family and friends routinely. Once, on a visit home to see her parents, she completely disguised herself as a clown and knocked on the door, whereupon answering, her own mother couldn't recognize her. During summers in her high school years, she worked for the city of Aurora as a leader and camp counselor for younger kids. Along her journey, she earned a position as a counselor mentor at the world famous Interlachen Academy, a private school devoted solely to the arts, admitting only the very best and talented young musicians from all over the world. Upon graduation from Denison, she went on to earn her master's degree in art therapy from Norwich University in Vermont. She would go on to become an instructor and counselor at a facility in Ellsworth, Maine, called the Homestead, for teens with emotional challenges and or learning disabilities, helping them improve their lives through painting, sculpting, woodworking, and pottery. As a young adult, she became an accomplished potter and was an excellent amateur photographer. She always loved animals and was especially fond of golden retrievers. She was an adventurer. In 1977, she drove by herself from Ohio to Yellowstone National Park just to see it for herself. Driving home through a severe blizzard outside of Jackson Hole in Wyoming, her car was literally stampeded by a herd of elk, forcing her to stay for over a week while her car was being repaired. The ones who knew Susan described her as pleasant and comfortable to be with. Her heart was open at all times. She cared little for business, politics, or material things. She was the family free spirit, all in for peace and love. Robert Mountford Jr. and Susan initially met at a facility in Ellsworth, where they both worked. In 1981, Robert Mountford Jr. and Laura Susan Ramsey were 27 years old. They were both social workers and very compassionate and altruistic human beings. Being social workers, they came up with an idea to do a money-raising hike for children with difficulties in development. At that time, Robert's mother was running a school which served children with mental challenges in Maine, the most northeast U.S. state. And that's where they got an idea. The school was called Little Red Schoolhouse, and the two of them had a very noble cause. For their philanthropist hike, they decided to do a partial hike on the Appalachian Trail. In the spring of 1981, Robert and Susan were on the trail and went missing. They haven't contacted anyone in days, and they usually reported their adventures and progress to family, friends. In the beginning, the authorities had high hopes to find them lost somewhere off the trail and return them home safely. These hopes would soon come to an abrupt end, less than 2 weeks after going them missing, when there was a gruesome scene found at the Wapiti shelter in Giles. 75 yards from the shelter, they found 2 bodies placed in their sleeping bags in a shallow grave covered with leaves and forest debris. It turned out to be Robert and Susan. He had a gunshot wound to the head, and she had a head injury and multiple stabbing wounds. It was determined that the killer must have dragged them to this spot after killing them, because they found blood between the shelter's floorboards. There was also a camera with the film removed, and the book Susan had planned to read during the trip. The killer tried to cover his tracks after this disturbing act and erased Robert's and Susan's signatures from the previous hiker logbooks they signed while hiking the Appalachian Trail. To do that, he would need to hike and go to multiple shelters. However, there was one mistake the killer made, which would ruin all of his efforts and undoubtedly put him at the crime scene. There was a bloody fingerprint found inside of one of Susan's books, and it did not belong to Robert nor Susan. It belonged to a third person, a man called Randall Lee Smith. It turned out that he was also last seen with Robert and Susan by other hikers of the trail. It is believed that Randall Lee Smith is highly introverted, and that he only agreed to join the pair once they invited him to. They had a dinner together at a shelter, but immediately after he attacked them. Robert was shot in the head with a .22 caliber pistol, and Susan was hit with a piece of iron and then stabbed repeatedly with a knife. When something bad and unfortunate happens, people always tend to analyze every detail and wonder what would have been if just one small detail was different or happened a bit earlier or later. I am mentioning this because there was a hiker who hiked with Robert and Susan in part of their way. She is Renate Lilliefors, and she was 24 at the time. She had to separate from the pair due to the injury, which forced her to seek medical attention before getting back to the trail. They even had a plan to meet up again later at the trail. She would join them when she gets some rest and treats her injury. This was shortly before the murders, and she never got to meet up with them on the trail again. And she will wonder until the rest of her life what would have been if she stayed with them. Would she also get killed with them? Or would that maybe save them from their horrible destiny? She was so agitated by the events that she even attended Robert's funeral. Randall Lee Smith was eventually arrested, with police tricking him into thinking that he had a severe bug bite and he needed to sign the papers for medical attention. The big question, which is left unanswered until today, is the motive of this terrible crime. Despite having a great deal of evidence against Randall, the prosecutors were unable to establish a motive, and they were concerned that their case was not strong enough to guarantee a conviction. With the agreement of Susan and Robert's families, Randall was ultimately offered a plea agreement, which he unexpectedly accepted one day before the trial. He pleaded guilty to 2 counts of second-degree murder and was sentenced to 30 years in prison. According to the resources, while incarcerated, he generally kept to himself and never caused any problems. Due to good behavior, he served only half of his sentence, 15 years, and was released on mandatory parole for good behavior in 1996. Understandably, his release after only half of his sentence outraged the families of victims. After his release, he moved back into his mother's house in Ingram in Texas and wore an electronic monitoring anklet as a part of his 10 years of supervision. There were many theories about the motive for this inexplicable crime. The prosecutor who led the prosecution against Randall theorized that Randall became romantically obsessed with Susan. Maybe he tried to flirt with her, but she didn't react, or Robert unintentionally interrupted his attempts, and that got him angry. There were also theories that Randall E. Smith loved the Appalachian Trail so much that he considered other hikers as interlopers. The murder of Susan and Robert was so shocking and interesting to the public that there was a book written about these events. It is called Murder on the Appalachian Trail, written by Jess Carr and published in 1985. The author theorizes that Randall E. Smith was delusional and living in fantasy life because of his troubled childhood. Maybe Susan and Robert, being social workers, recognized how troubled he was and tried to get him to talk, which made him burst out. As Randall mostly kept to himself after he got out of prison, you might think that this is the end of this gruesome and sad story. However, we could say for this case that history repeats itself, and this story is not nearly at the end. In early 2008, neighbors reported that they hadn't seen Randall in some time and were concerned for his welfare. The authorities searched his house, but everything looked normal, although his utilities had been shut off as no payment was made in some time. Those who knew Randall assumed he went to the woods because, most of all, he enjoyed solitude and nature. But nevertheless, they were concerned because he was never absent for so long. They even arranged a search party and hung missing posters around town. And where was Randall? Just unbelievably, Randall was repeating history from years and years before. He tried to murder again and again on the Appalachian Trail. Some people just aren't meant to be released from prison ever, not even with good behavior. On May 8th, 2008, two men named Sean Farmer and Scott Johnston were camping at Walnut Flats on the Appalachian Trail when they were approached by the man who introduced himself as Ricky Williams. They ended up inviting him to have dinner with them. Why not? However, they had no idea they were about to spend evening with a murderer convicted for the murder on the same trail years ago, as with Susan and Robert 27 years ago. At some point during the evening, Randall abruptly pulled out a .22 caliber revolver and shot both men, Sean and Scott. Although they both had serious injuries, fortunately, they somehow managed to escape the scene in Randall's car and drove 40 miles to the closest hospital. Randall, on the other side, fled the scene in their car, Ford Ranger pickup truck, but was eventually spotted by Virginia State Trooper. In the chase, Randall crashed and overturned in the truck and ended up in hospital, where he was officially arrested and charged with 2 counts of attempted murder. He was subsequently transferred to the New River Regional Jail Medical Unit. However, he died shortly after of a suspected blood clot related to the injuries sustained in the car crash. At the moment of death, he was 54 years old, and he was obviously a very troubled mind. There are many murderers in the world, but there are only few crazy enough to try to repeat almost the same crime at almost the same place with 27 years apart. especially as Randall was released from prison still young, and he got another chance to live a normal life. And then he chooses to reprise the crime. Why? Just why? I guess we'll never know. That is why these stories are so shocking.